Between the stories we tell, there are stories that shape them. While we prepare for the next season of Haunted UK Fiction, we're taking a moment to step away from the stories and into their origins. Ink and Influence is a short-form series exploring the authors, ideas, and moments that gave rise to some of the darkest and most enduring works of fiction. In this episode, we turn our attention to Dean Koontz and the strange, suspenseful, often deeply human worlds that have made him one of the most widely read authors of our time. For many readers browsing the horror or thriller shelves, Dean Koontz sits alongside names like Stephen King, Peter Straub, and Clive Barker. But Koontz himself has often resisted being placed neatly into one category. His books may contain horror, suspense, science fiction, crime, conspiracy, the supernatural, and moments of real darkness, but they are rarely horror alone. At the heart of a Dean Koontz novel there is often something else: hope. That may sound unusual for an author whose stories involve psychic abilities, shadowy experiments, killers, conspiracies, monsters, and the possibility that reality is far stranger than we think. But Koontz has built a career on balancing terror with wonder, darkness with decency, and fear with the possibility of grace. His fiction often asks, what happens when ordinary people are confronted with something extraordinary? And more importantly, what do they become when they face it? One of the questions writers are asked most often is, where do your ideas come from? Koontz has answered this in many ways over the years, sometimes humorously, sometimes more seriously. Like many writers, he seems to suggest that ideas arrive from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes they can be traced to a song, a memory, a fear, or a single sentence. Other times they appear without explanation, as though dropped fully formed into the mind. One of the most famous examples from his own career is Odd Thomas. While working on another novel, Koontz suddenly found a sentence appearing in his mind. My name is Odd Thomas. It had nothing to do with the book he was writing. It didn't fit the project in front of him, but the voice was clear enough and unusual enough that he wrote it down. From that single line came a character that would go on to become one of Koontz's most beloved creations, a young man with the ability to see the dead, drawn again and again into the path of danger, grief, and mystery. Odd Thomas is an excellent example of what makes Koontz's work distinctive. The premise is supernatural, the stakes are often frightening, but the story is driven by character, compassion, humor, and moral courage. The dead make an appearance, but the story isn't only about ghosts. It's about what the living owe to one another. It's about kindness in a brutal world, and it's about the strange burden of knowing more than others can see. Koontz's writing process also reflects this sense of discovery. Earlier in his career he used outlines, but eventually moved away from them. Instead, he has often described beginning with a premise, a theme, or a character, then allowing the story to unfold as he writes. This approach can sound risky. To write without knowing exactly where the story will go requires a certain level of trust in one's own imagination, in the characters, and in the subconscious mind. But for Koontz, that uncertainty seems to be part of the energy of the work. His characters are not simply moved through a pre-built machine. They're allowed to surprise him, and when characters surprise the writer, they're more likely to surprise the reader as well. In another case, the idea for his novel Life Expectancy came from music. While listening to Paul Simon, Koontz was struck by a lyric about life being made of patterns that can scarcely be controlled. From that seed came the idea of a child whose future is shaped by a series of predictions made at the moment of his birth. A pattern, a fate, a life shadowed by dates on which terrible things are expected to happen. It's a very Koontzian idea. Suspense built not just around what will happen, but around whether fate can be resisted. Again and again his stories return to this tension. Are we trapped by destiny? Are we shaped by trauma? Are dark forces, human or otherwise, stronger than goodness? Can ordinary courage still matter? To understand Dean Koontz's fiction, it helps to understand the world he grew up in. His childhood was marked by poverty, instability, and the threat of violence from an alcoholic father. Years later, Koontz would reflect that many of the monsters in his novels were inspired not by ghosts or creatures, but by people capable of cruelty. It may also explain why so many of his stories are ultimately about courage. Again and again, his protagonists are ordinary people who discover that fear loses much of its power the moment they decide to stand and face it. That moral center is one reason Koontz's work stands apart. His fiction can be frightening, but it is rarely nihilistic. Evil exists in his books. Sometimes it's human, sometimes it's scientific. Other times it feels almost cosmic, but it's usually opposed by loyalty, humor, love, faith, friendship, or the stubborn refusal to give in. And then, of course, there are the dogs. For long-time readers, Koontz's love of golden retrievers is almost inseparable from his public identity and his fiction. Dogs appear throughout his work not merely as pets, but as symbols of loyalty, intuition, innocence, and joy. His relationship with the organization Canine Companions introduced him to the world of service dogs, and eventually led to the adoption of Trixie, a golden retriever who became deeply important to him and his wife. After Trixie's death, Koontz wrote about her in A Big Little Life, a memoir that revealed just how much meaning, humor, and emotional depth he found in her presence. This matters because it reveals something central about his fiction. Dean Koontz writes about terror, yes, but he also writes about what saves us from it. A loyal companion, a sudden act of courage, a stranger who chooses kindness, or a person who suffered but refuses to become cruel. Even in his darkest stories, there's often a sense that the world contains more than danger. It contains mystery, beauty, connection, and perhaps even guidance from somewhere beyond ordinary understanding. That blend of suspense, horror, science fiction, spirituality, and hope has made Koontz difficult to classify, but easily recognizable. His work belongs to the shadowy space between genres, where a thriller can become supernatural, where a horror story can become a love story, and where the most frightening question isn't always what is hunting us. Sometimes it's, who will we become when the darkness finds us? In the end, Dean Koontz's influence lies not only in the fear he creates, but in the humanity he insists upon placing beside it. His stories remind us that terror may enter through the door, the dream, the laboratory, the roadside or the grave, but courage, compassion, and hope can enter just as unexpectedly, and sometimes, in a world full of monsters, the most powerful thing a writer can offer is the belief that goodness still matters. If you enjoyed this, you'll find more stories waiting in our feed and a new season not far behind. Thanks for listening to Haunted UK Fiction. Until next time, stay safe and take care.